In this video, I'm just going to review a couple of the things from Unit 2.3. In this unit, we were talking about how to calculate and identify absolute change and relative change. So I have the formulas again here for absolute and relative change. These are formulas that you need to commit to memory. Remember, absolute change measures how much of a change happens, and that is done by subtracting. The order that you subtract is important. Absolute change is found by taking the newer value and then subtracting from that the older value or the original value. This will tell you how much something has changed, and it will also tell you if something is an increase or a decrease based on whether you get a positive or a negative value. Remember, if the new value is larger than the old value, your number will be positive. So when you subtract, you'll have a positive value. If the new value is smaller than the old value, when you subtract, you'll get a negative. So that means you have a decrease. Relative change compares the absolute change to what the original value was. So a formula for relative change is the new value minus the old value, which is just the absolute change, divided by the old value. So we want to compare that change to what it was to begin with. Often relative change is written as a percentage. So once you have this fraction, you can divide to get the decimal and then multiply by 100% to change it to a percent. All right, here's an example. Number one, a car was purchased for $23,600 in 2019. In 2020, the same vehicle is worth only $18,880 due to depreciation, which means the value of a car goes down over time. Calculate the absolute and relative change. So to find the absolute change, we're going to take the new value and subtract the old value. So the new value is the one that occurs the most recent, which is $18,880. And from that, we're subtracting the older value, which is $23,600. So since the new value is smaller, when we subtract, we get a negative number. The absolute change could be described as negative $4,720. That negative also tells us that we have a decrease in the value of the car. If we want to find the relative change, we want to take the absolute change, which we've already calculated. So we've already done the new minus old here, so that's replaced in the numerator. And we want to compare that to the old value, the starting value of the car. So dividing negative 4,720 by 23,600. So when you divide, you get negative 0.2. I'm going to take this 100% out for a second. So before you change it to a percent, the decimal is negative 0.2. And then when you turn that decimal into a percent, it's negative 20%. So if absolute change is negative, the relative change will also be negative. If one is positive, then they'll both be positive. So this can be interpreted as in two different ways. We could say the cost of the car decreased by $4,720 or decreased by 20% of its original value, or we can say that the absolute change was negative 4,720, and when we say negative, it's like replacing the word decreased. Right, so for the second example, we're looking at a change in sales tax. In April 2019, the sales tax in Utah increased from 5.95% to 6.10%. I'm going to calculate the absolute and relative change. So now here, even though the values that we are comparing are percentages themselves, we can still find the absolute and relative change in the same way. So when I find the absolute change, I just want to find the difference in the percents. So I'm taking the newer value minus the old value, and I know that I know which is which by the wording. So from means the starting value, and to means in this case what happened after. So we have 6.10 minus 5.95, which is the difference of 0.15. Since that difference is positive, that means that there was an increase, right? And we also see that in the wording of the question. The relative change takes the absolute change, the 0.15, compares it to the starting value, which was 5.95. And once again, we're going to change that to a percent in a second. Let me take this out of my formula. So first I'm going to divide 0.15 divided by 5.95. That gives me this decimal, 0.025. I rounded that, so it's approximately equal to, that's out to 3 decimal places. Now I could turn that into a percent by moving my decimal point 2 places to the right, which gives me about 2.5%. So we have to be really careful in how we interpret this, because the quantitative information that we are measuring the change of was already in percent form. So one way that we could describe this is to say that the absolute change in the tax rate was an increase of 0.15 percentage points. So by saying percentage points, that describes that we're subtracting those percents to just find out how many percent points that we are going up or going down. The relative change was an increase of about 2.5% of the original rate. So when we say 2.5%, that means that this is a comparison between the change, 0.15, and what the original rate was, 5.95. A couple of things to remember. In general, absolute change just measures how much change is occurring, how much something goes up or goes down. Relative change is a comparison between the absolute change and the old or the original or the starting value. If the absolute change or relative changes are negative, if absolute or relative change is negative, I should say, change my grammar here, then there is a decrease. So if the change is negative, that means there's a decrease. If the change is positive, then there is an increase. A couple of things that we saw in the unit was a way to make comparisons between two situations that had either the same absolute change or the same relative change. If two situations have the same kind of absolute change, so they're increasing by the same amount or decreasing by the same amount, then the case with this smaller original value will have the greater relative change. So for example, in the unit, we compared population of states and how the populations changed over time. So if 2 states grew by 1 million people, the relative change of those 2 states might be different. So if we had a very small state like Rhode Island and a very large state like Texas, the population of Rhode Island is very small. The population of Texas is quite large. So if they both change by 1 million people, that 1 million people is going to have a larger impact on the smaller state of Rhode Island because they had a smaller original population. So they will experience a greater relative change or relative increase. If 2 situations have the same relative change, though, the same percent increase or decrease, then the case with the larger original value will have the greater absolute change. So let's say that 2 colleges are increasing their tuition by the same percentage, let's say 10%. So let's compare like the cost of attending Suffolk Community College for 1 semester versus like Harvard for 1 semester. Suffolk Community College is less expensive per semester than Harvard would be. But let's say that both schools are going to increase their tuition by 10%. A 10% increase for a student who's paying the Harvard tuition will be a greater absolute change because the tuition of Harvard is larger than the tuition at Suffolk. So a 10% increase for a student at Suffolk would be a smaller absolute change, a smaller increase in just a sheer dollar amount, but they could both have the same percentage of change. So it's really important for this unit that you are able to understand and identify absolute and relative change, but also be able to calculate absolute and relative change. And we are going to see these ideas being used throughout the rest of this module as well.